Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And just to let you know, we have another program tomorrow night. It's a book group sponsored by the Acadia National Park about Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods. So if you're interested in that book and you want to discuss it with a ranger from Acadia National Park, that's tomorrow at 6 p.m. in the library.
You should come back for that.
I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to thank Kate for running the tech tonight. Super helpful. And she will be making sure that anyone who's online, if they have questions, that they will get out to Kathryn. And so it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Kathryn Graven. She comes to us from Great Cranberry Island, where she lives when she's not in Boston. Kathryn is a mixed media artist, musician, and writer. She reported in both Tokyo and the US, worked for ABC News Bureau and the Wall Street Journal. She also taught international business reporting at Boston University. And then, in a career pivot, Kathryn studied mixed media painting and abstract art at Boston's Museum of Fine Art and at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. She now regularly shows her art in both solo and group exhibits. To a long list of accomplishments, Kathryn has now added author as well. In the words of poet Susan Deborah King, Memoirs of a Mask Maker is a powerful, moving testament to meeting monumental loss with passion, determination, and outsized creativity. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming her tonight to talk about her first book, Memoirs of a Mask Maker.
So nice. I'm gonna sit, we'll be kind of all on the same level here. Can everybody hear? Yeah, we're good, okay. So I'm so happy to be here in this library. Thanks to Kate and Melissa and Sadie for having me. Some of you might be Book Talk regulars. You have quite a program here. It's really amazing. And some of you might be just happy to wind down at the end of summer after too many visitors. And for people online, maybe you're just wishing you could be in this lovely library, but this is another way to do it. But however you got here, I really appreciate your curiosity to come out. And I'm so happy to be here tonight. So I'm Kathryn Graven, and my book is Memoirs of a Mask Maker. Just a little introduction. I've been coming up to Maine and spending summers out on the island since 1992 when we first got married. And while I've lived on Great Cranberry and Islesford, and even coming into Southwest by our boat, I just have always loved the libraries. They've just been an amazing place, and I know how so important they are to like local communities and families. And when my kids were little and we were out on the islands, I just loved story time because I could kind of drop my kids off at the library for 20 minutes and breathe. And now my kids are grown, but actually I still really love story time. So it's nice to be in a library. And I know that keeping these islands, these libraries going takes a lot of time, energy, and resources and talented people. So thank you to all of you who keep these libraries so vibrant and alive and growing. So appreciate that. And my husband, Dennis Infernal, he's a loyal traveler with me. He's been such a part of the adventure of living out on Great Cranberry, raising our kids, having global adventures, and sharing this book project with me. So we thank Dennis for being here tonight and for all he's done. I guess I'll start briefly in the beginning with, why write a memoir? I'm not famous. You never heard of me, whatever. But I decided that writing a memoir is a little bit like jumping off the dock on Great Cranberry Island, which is something we do every day, mostly whenever we can on Great Cranberry. This may, I don't know, remind you of just how crazy those island people are out there. Still, we love to jump off the dock. And I guess when we head out the door, 4 o'clock, we think it's time to go jumping. It seems like a really good idea. And then you get to the dock and you look at the water and you go, wow, that looks really cold. Like, should we really do this?
4 a.m.
4 p.m. It's kind of the end of the day. We mark the end of the day with this jump. And we look at the water and say, oh, it's cold. Is it really cold? It is really cold. It looks cold. And then we jump. And then we say, okay, well, one jump, you're not a true Mainer. The rule out on Great Cranberry is if you want to say that you're a real Mainer, you have to jump 3 times. So we jumped 3 times because we really want to be Mainers. So we jump, and then we feel great, and then we go home and we say, well, that was really great. And I think that writing this book has been a little bit like that. It seemed like a good idea. There were moments when I was kind of panicked. What's going to happen? Is it going to work? All of that. But somehow we did. And here we are, and I'm really glad to have written it. So, I don't know, are any of you jumpers? Swimmers? You are? Oh, you're all jumpers. Oh, you're my people. Anyway, I thought let's turn to the book a little bit. The organization of this book, Memoirs of a Mask Maker, actually came out of the pandemic. I ended up, during the pandemic, sewing hundreds and hundreds of masks. And the underlying story that I had already started before the pandemic was really about losing my mother and finding substitute mothers. And that was sort of the heart of my story. And then the sewing and the making of masks, as the pandemic emerged, and I really went crazy on sewing masks, just seemed to be a way to tie the story together and bring it into the here and the now. So that's why it's called Memoirs of a Mask Maker, and it's not about old Venetian masks or no masks or whatever. It is about the kind of masks that people wore. But since I hope you'll read the book, I'm not really going to talk about mask making today. What I thought I'd do instead is, when I wrote the book, a kind of one of the other undercurrents of the story was what I learned by sitting at various families' tables. I learned how really important life lessons. I learned how to integrate and move between cultures and families and sort of figure things out. And so tables became a sort of important sub-thread of the story. And they also provide the clue, I think, for if you read the book to try to understand how I came to what I call tend grief and reclaim joy. It happened, a lot of it happened at the dinner table.
What grief?
Tend grief.
Tend
To
grief.
tend to grief and reclaim joy.
Right.
So I thought what we do now is take a little trip together. If you haven't read the book, this might be a way to connect some dots, and if anybody's read it, online people or whatever, this may be a different way of slicing and dicing and looking at it that you hadn't quite thought of. And it doesn't really spoil it so that you won't go read the book. How's that? It's a tricky wicket here to get you interested, but not give it all away. So I thought we'd visit some tables. Everybody ready? A little trip to tables? Great, we're all here. So the first table we're going to go to, we're going to begin in Greene, a very small town in northern Iowa. This is where my father, David Graven, grew up, and where my grandmother, whose name was Helen Davis Graven, and she's one of the main characters in Memoirs. This is where Helen set the standard for family dinners in my family. This is Easter, 1966, in a very small town in northern Iowa. Back at Graham's house, there were spring baskets full of boiled chocolate eggs, squishy yellow marshmallow chicks, and a rainbow of jelly beans. Graham prepared a yummy Easter dinner built around a baked ham, homemade rolls, and green beans canned fresh from her garden. She pulled off large family meals with grace and ease and an overarching sense of authority earned through her voracious reading and world travels. She set high standards for entertaining. The fully extended dining room table, covered with a neatly pressed tablecloth, laid with polished silver, and her best china, was anything but a casual call to dinner. I knew it meant it was time to buck up and act like a big girl. I eyed the beautiful bright goldfinch salt and pepper shakers that decorated her spring table and fought the temptation to reach and grab Oh, how Gram loved her birds. Granddad presided over the meal just like he presided over his court as a federal judge. He never dumbed down the table conversations for us. You could learn a lot talking to Granddad, but he expected us to do more than listen. He encouraged us to voice our opinions. So later that Easter Sunday afternoon, my family was in a terrible car accident, and my mother died. I was 5 years old. From that point on in Minneapolis, my early memories of eating at the kitchen table were about the awkward, unbalanced seating arrangement. My father and brother sat at the opposite ends. My sister and I sat across from each other, but there was always too much room at the table. My mother wasn't there. That's one of the reasons that I loved being asked to stay for dinner at my best friend Chrissy's house across the alley. Chrissy's mother, Phyllis, is another key character in my story. Let's visit her dining room table. So this would be Minneapolis in the 1970s. Phyllis was already cooking for 6, so one war never fazed her. But when I stayed for dinner, their family seating arrangement needed tweaking. I sat next to Christy, which meant the youngest daughter, Mary, had to shift and squeeze around to the corner to the table end next to Phyllis. I wanted to fit in without causing disruption. So I watched and mimicked what everyone else did. The family held hands while Warren said grace. I held Christy and Mary's hands. Gesegnete Mahlzeit, or blessed mealtime in German, was Warren's way of giving everyone the go-ahead to dig in. Gesegnete Mahlzeit, I said too. Phyllis presented elegant meals every day. She made it seem effortless, but in fact her presentation was based on a couple of unbendable rules. No green Parmesan cheese shakers, red ketchup bottles, or white drippy ranch salad dressing bottles were ever allowed on the table. Condiments had their own bowls, serving dishes, and without fail she served salad in separate salad bowls, which by local standards then was exotic. Phyllis slipped in fresh avocados and garnished with fresh pomegranate seeds, while the rest of Minnesota was grateful for a wedge of iceberg lettuce and artificial bacon bits, or worse, canned spinach. Over time, my presence at Phyllis's dinner table seemed unremarkable. No big deal. If my dad was working late and I didn't have to cook, I knew I would be welcome for dinner, no questions. There was always a place for me. So, in due course, my older brother and sister went off to college. And so, by the time I was 13, I was living at home with my father, and I was the cook. I ran the house with him, did everything, but we were sitting alone at a very empty table. But my father had a solution. So we lived on a creek in kind of south Minneapolis called Terrymore Avenue, kind of a big brick house that was growing more and more empty by the day. Anyway, Dad and I religiously ate grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup for lunch on Sundays after church. We bought the bread and the cans of soup, and I never let on that I knew homemade tasted different. I relished the one-on-one time with him without the tensions of having my older siblings at home. After we finished eating, we'd push aside the plates and play a cribbage match at the table. Best of 3 games before tackling the dishes. We kept score on a white poster sheet taped to the wall, hundreds of games of cribbage. Over the years, we invented titles for our tournaments, culminating in the father-daughter cribbage championship for the free world. No one ever played cards across the table. No one ever played cards at the table across the alley. Wanting a connection with both my dad and the safe haven of a normal family, I straddled 2 worlds. So knowing that families have different eating habits and different rules at the table, and some are big and squishy with a lot of people, and some are really kind of empty, helped me when I arrived in Japan as a 16-year-old wide-eyed exchange student in 1977. But I wasn't fully prepared. I had so much more to learn in the home of Makoto and Katsuko Maniwa, who were my Japanese AFS homestay parents, and I lived with them for a year. Katsuko, along with Phyllis and Helen, my grandmother, is another one of the main characters in the book. So now we're in 1977, Otawara, Tochigi Prefecture in Japan. Oba-chan, or grandma, had prepared a special welcome meal of sukiyaki. On their host family application, the Maniwa family described the grandmother who lived with them as not very cheerful. First impression, they were honest. Barely speaking, Oba-chan laid out the meal on the low table in the living room. The five of us sat on the tatami floor, our feet scrunched under the low table, warmed by the electric kotatsu heater under the blanket, and sipped green tea. Mujo-san, my AFS advisor, translated the new essentials of my daily life. The Maniwa's drugstore opened at 10 a.m. and closed at 7:30. The family ate dinner after that. As the sukiyaki simmered in a black pot on the table, I followed Mujo-san's every movement. Crack the raw egg into a bowl, stir it with chopsticks, dip the cooked meat into the yellowy froth. After dinner, Mujo-san left for the train station. I climbed the stairs to my new 4 tatami mat room, buried my face in my futon, and cried my blue eyes out. The pillow was small and hard, filled with some kind of rustling husks, not feathers. I made a hasty but lasting decision. I hated Japanese pillows. The next morning, my tears gave way to a new urgency to figure things out. Try to smile, I reminded myself. At breakfast, we sat on chairs at the kitchen table. Everyone had their own designated rice and miso soup bowls and chopsticks. All the chopsticks went into the same bamboo cup holder. Finding mine without touching everyone else's was like a real-life pick-up sticks game. Well, it turned out that kind of knowing how to slurp noodles and sit on the floor and drink sake and all of that was a good skill to have in the years that I was working and studying in Japan and in Tokyo. And 10 years later, I discovered how steamy hot pots can also lead to romance. Yeah, he's there.
A steaming hot pot?
Yeah, steamy hot pots. Here we are, the steamy hot pot table. I was never going to be one of those women who let love dictate her career or life path. I was too independent, too resourceful, too ambitious. Anyway, finding somebody globally compatible, lovable, and trustworthy was a tall order. Then a friend from my former Japanese language center asked me to meet his PhD thesis advisor, newly arrived in Japan for a sabbatical year. My friend was returning to the US and wanted to leave his professor with some local contacts. The three of us met for a shabu-shabu meal in Roppongi, which is a kind of a nightclub area of Tokyo. For hours, we dipped meat in boiling broth, slurped udon noodles, and drank sake. The professor, Dennis, was smart, curious, talkative, and grounded. Very basic Japanese language skills. Dennis didn't exactly fit my image of a Harvard Business School professor. But sure, I'd be happy to help him adjust to life in Tokyo, I told my friend afterwards. So things worked out pretty well with Dennis. He's here today. We got married, we went on to have 2 sons, and we made a point of sitting down to regular family meals. And borrowing from all our other prior table experiences, we tried to make even the most unusual mealtimes seem normal. Next stop on our trip, we're going to go to Mysore, India. It's our first family trip there. We've made several family trips to India, which you can also read about. Our sons, Luke and David, at this point are 11 and 9 years old, so this is 2009. They're tired from a day of sightseeing and their very first elephant ride. At dinner, I learned what their eyes had taken in that day. When the food took forever to arrive, I suggested that we play a version of the telephone tag game. There was a collective groan. "Oh, Mom." I insisted. After repeating the previous line, each person added a new element. I started. On the road from Bangalore to Mysore, we saw sugarcane being harvested, trucks loaded with coconuts, a flat tire, a water buffalo, thali lunch on banana leaf, giant golden Ganesha statues, cows pooping next to a car, rice paddies, another auto rickshaw with a flat tire, old men driving ox carts loaded with more coconuts, families packed into small compact cars, more water buffaloes. I call this our family's Mysore perspective. See how the world goes by, see us out in the world, see us coming together, sharing a meal, talking about the day. That's home. Listen, hear us smile. Finally, let's return to the US, to a funny, quirky little island in Maine, off the coast of Acadia National Park, Great Cranberry Island. Dennis and I bought a funky little house out there about 20 years ago, remodeling the house, planting a garden, and establishing an orchard has been our summer bliss ever since. I love the island, its beauty, and the people we share it with. On Great Cranberry, the cocktail hour starts early, and dinners are mostly casual. Island living means you improvise when you don't have all the ingredients. Still, neighbors who pop over for dinner know the risks. One special neighbor, Jan, known to some others as Queenie on the island, is a delight to share a meal with. She's 89 years old. She comes for dinner. She praises my cooking, and sometimes she gets up rather abruptly to depart. But she always leaves with a smile, a wave, and this memorable quip. "It was so nice to have my feet under your table." Mm-hmm. So, thank you for listening. I think that each of these experiences, little snippets of family table life, show how the sort of emotional work that happened from being a young girl to being out into the world, to then having people into my home. And this was my particular journey of figuring out how to deal with loss and to find new joys and new connections. I think in one way or another, this is something we're all going to have to do. I did it maybe earlier than some, but we all have this, we're all going to have a little bit of work to do when it comes to how do we reclaim joy and deal with grief. And I think one of the things about the pandemic is a lot of people experienced a lot of loss. It may not have been anyone you know particular dying from the disease, or it might have been that, but we all lost time being shuttered in or not being able to connect with people. Maybe we lost, seeing people we really cared about, loss of freedom. There was a lot of different loss, and I think people are still going to be taking a little time to recover from all that. And so in that way, though my story of losing my mother and finding all these other mothers may seem kind of removed from everybody else's experience, I think as time goes on and because of the pandemic, we are sharing and have a chance to understand what their losses were and what they're doing with it. So my last chapter in the book begins with this. When someone we love dies, the grief rides with us for the rest of life's journey. Will it ride softly, gently next to us in the passenger seat as a memory of love? Will it be pushed to the back seat, banished from clear sight? Perhaps accessible through the rear-view mirror? Will it be stretched in front of us, guiding us to our fear and acceptance of death? How will I tend my grief? This is not a one-off question. This will come up over and over. The longer we live, the more we love. It's front and center now as we face a devastating global pandemic.
Can I ask you something really quickly with what you said? Because since I'm hiking all over the place or out in nature a lot, and I don't carry a cell phone by choice, and I'm not in touch with a lot of people as much as it seems many people are these days. My outside impression is that a lot of people, or the climate is just wanting to rush back into something that escaped them because of a pandemic. But from your experience, do you find many people taking pause still, or taking time to reflect, or just trying to rush back into a life pre-pandemic, or a culture or a climate pre-pandemic?
So, what's your name?
Richard.
Richard. So Richard's question is, are people rushing back into life after the pandemic, or are they taking time to kind of ponder and think about it? And is that right, in short?
Right, or also, right, and not necessarily, I'm not saying everyone, but just in a sense, the climate. I mean, I've met individuals that obviously life has shifted, or they're approaching life differently, but still the status quo, or the majority, the climate, I just feel that a lot of, I don't necessarily feel an overt state of reflection as the norm.
It's hard to say the norm, because I'm kind of in this space with this book. I like to think that people, I think there's both. There's some people who, because of personality probably, or life circumstances, just have to rush back in. You know, they don't really have an option to sit, depending on your career, your profession, your family situation.
Yeah,
and then I think there are other people who, when things opened up again after the pandemic, did take kind of a pause. Like, how fast do I want to get back into booking up my schedule and being with this? And I think there's all different ways. I think it's, if you talk to families with kids, I think a lot of parents and mothers are realizing as time goes on, like, well, the pandemic did alter their kids' education or their development,
absolutely,
their socialization. I mean, my kids were in college, but they didn't have the same kind of college experience that others would have had. You know, listening to lectures on Zoom may be convenient, but it's not the same as showing up. So people are seeing that now. I think there was an initial period of either you race back in or hesitating, which maybe either one you might have been. And now I think the time is now and going forward to really look at what did we lose, what did we gain. That it's an ongoing assessment, but that was a real break. But I do think, for example, we had a trip to Washington, D.C. and did see all the white flags for the 1 million Americans who had died during COVID on the lawn. I mean, that's a lot of grief.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot of people who lost people, families, caregivers. So I think it's still there. I think they're like, that's the typical thing in American society. We want to push grief under the rug. It's uncomfortable. It's sad. It's a lot of things that people don't want to deal with. But this is an opportunity for people to think about it. And I think that's one of the reasons I felt strongly about writing this book and putting it out there is, you know, that was my particular life experience, was dealing with a lot of grief. You know, read the book. I had a lot of women who were very important to me, who stepped in with my, after my mother died, and then in turn I lost all of them. And so it's compounded and compounded.
You lost all of them for COVID?
No, well, spoiler alert, but just as I was about to have my own family, a lot of things happened.
Okay,
And so it's been a lifetime of making connection and losing it, and making connection and losing it, and sifting through and trying to figure out what does this mean. And so, while I'm not an expert and I'm not a psychologist or anything, I have a lot of lived experience that I think is important in this time. So, anyway, I think the idea about talking about whatever the grief is, or the experience, whether it's through COVID or just your life in general, is just making it a little bit easier for other people to talk about it.
yeah,
I've gotten a few comments. Chapter 2 is a very difficult chapter in the book, relates to the family car accident, and I had several people, friends say, it was really rough, chapter 2, I don't know if I could keep reading. I said, well, keep reading, the whole rest of the book is very interesting, and we have to come out of that. But, and then even a woman on Cranberry this summer said, oh, chapter 2 was really tough. But she said, I have to tell you, I don't tell people this, but my mother had been in a terrible car accident when I was 6 years old, and I was so afraid that she was gonna die, and she didn't die. And this woman is 85 years old and hasn't talked about her mother almost dying when she was little and the impact that had on her. And I felt really honored, that she wanted to then kind of talk about it. And I've had many other people who will just come up and say, I never told anybody, but, my dad died when I was 9. I don't share that with people. It's like, really? It's life. So it's little things like that, giving a little bit of openness to say it's okay to talk about it, and there are ways through it, and interesting ways through it. And I think another point sort of about this story is it starts in Minnesota, but throughout the book we go to Japan, we go to India, we go around the world. I have my hiking days in Tibet and Nepal covered in here. And so it is kind of a long kind of life searching, but along the way there's just been so many amazing people who are willing and open to stepping in and helping. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book was, I guess I started it when I was kind of in my mid-50s, late 50s, and I was thinking, it's kind of crazy, I feel really happy. I was at a really nice point in my life. I liked my husband, my kids were, doing well. I had a lovely dog at the time. The dog has since died, but I, felt really happy. And when you look at the statistics for kids who suffer early childhood loss or trauma, things don't usually work out that well. And so the book really began as a question. Why did I wind up happy? How did that happen? And it really is the story of the people who were willing to step in and help. And none of those people, by the way, are famous or remarkable, other than they were amazing. My grandmother, Helen, who set the nice table, and Phyllis, who is kind of an amazing artist, and my Japanese host mother, who you will love to read about, because she was an amazing Japanese woman, very connected in a lot of interesting ways. Some really amazing people, but they were just kind of your ordinary people. And I think that's the kind of story in any community that we're in, is that people can make a difference. And they did for me.
yeah.
That was a good question. Anybody else have any questions or comments or thoughts about?
Well,
Sure.
you didn't mention anything about the days that you spent making masks, and I'm wondering if that had something to do with you stepping up and helping others, preventing grief.
Interesting, making masks, preventing grief. Well, I didn't say much about that, and I could have. It's also kind of at the beginning of the book, is about being at my sewing machine. And it starts with sewing, and really, well, I'll read a little bit, maybe this will answer it. Starting my sewing machine is an act of communion. The steps are straightforward and firmly etched in my brain. Lift the loaded bobbin from the winder, open the throat case, and tuck the bobbin into place. Next, grab the thread end and pull it through the needle. Guide under the U-shaped groove, wrap it around the uptake lever and through the needle. Lower the pressure foot and step on the pedal. Invariably, the first stitches are uneven or tangled. The bobbin thread snags, the top thread snaps. Rrr, I say aloud to no one. Inexplicably, this happens even if the last time I sewed, the stitches were even and the machine purred perfectly. It's like my machine needs to warm up to me all over again, to recognize me, an old friend who's driving. Perhaps my Cortina machine acts this way to make me take a moment to visualize all the dresses, skirts, jackets, pillows, curtains, tablecloths, and napkins I've made, and to pause for another moment to connect to the women who taught me how to sew. I remember Graham insisting, whether cutting fabric or fixing a hem, that I must measure carefully and aim for perfection. I remember my friend Phyllis. She loved fabrics with bold prints and bright colors. I remember Katsuko, my Japanese host mother, buying me the most gorgeous cotton to sew my first summer yukata. I think of the hours spent sewing together, how productive, creative, and fabulously fashionable our sewing made us feel. And then I know I can sort the tangled threads and start again. I learned from these exquisite sewers, but sewing is not my profession. Growing up, sewing saved me from embarrassment and not having a mother to make choir dressers or school play costumes. Sewing connected me to Japanese culture when I had no words. Throughout my life, sewing helped me navigate deep losses and clear the way for new beginnings. Sewing is what I do to fight despair. Which is why in early March 2020, as reports of the deadly virus in Asia dominated news, I darted into sewing with purpose and urgency. I woke in the middle of the night, shaken by a dream so vivid, so clear, I had to sit up and get my bearings. I dreamed about masks. Kakuta-san, my trusty Japanese high school friend, arrived in front of the Manwa drugstore wearing a white cloth mask over her face. I have a slight cold, she apologized. No problem, I said, knowing that wearing a mask is what Oto-san and Roka-san, my Japanese host parents, advised their drugstore customers to do. That's what they did at home when they felt a cold coming on. Odaiji ni, I heard Okasan say in my dream to Okasan as we walked down the street to school. Feel better, take care, stay well. All are fair translations for Odaiji ni. So, sewing is a way I connected to these women. Sewing and knowing the Japanese culture, even before in America, people weren't wearing masks, but I watched Japanese news and listened, and I knew that they were starting to all mask up. And I had this idea, well, I could do this. And I emailed a Japanese friend, and she sent me a pattern for a mask, and I started sewing. And I go on to say, you know, I had people in America saying, stop sewing, that masks are ridiculous, it's not gonna, you know, nobody will ever do this. And I just kept thinking, well, I don't know, it's a good thing. I don't know that it was necessarily, to your question, to prevent grief, but it was something, as I said, I felt like it was a community thing to do. It was a neighborly thing to do. It was a skill I had. And it was, when I don't know what else to do, sewing is a really good place to go for me. One of the things I did, I talk about it, but it really became in Boston, the sewing of the masks was a really great community thing for me. I was sewing them and posting on Facebook that I had masks, and people were writing me from all parts of my life saying, I'll take masks, I'll take this. And so I would go to the post office and mail the masks. Like I'd limit myself to once or twice a week to the Back Bay post office in Boston, and I'd send out the mask. And my sons were in the UK studying, so I was sending masks to the UK even. And friends in Japan said, could you send masks? I was sending, and I realized that when I was at the post office that, oh my goodness, I really rely on these postal workers. Like, I can't send masks if these people aren't good. And this was before the postal workers had to wear masks or that anybody was providing. I mean, there was no PPE for people. So I went into the post office and I was filling out one of those customs forms to send to the UK. And the woman said, well, what's inside? I said, I'm making masks. She looked at me. She said, really? And I said, oh, would you like a mask? Oh, that'd be great. So I went home that night, I sewed masks for the Back Bay post office ladies and guys, I guess. And then I was going to the post office and my own postal carrier was coming up this, and I said, I'm making masks, would you like one? So she took one, she wore one. And I brought her to the post office, and this woman was so happy, and she shared them around, and I left, and eventually, a few weeks, months later, that every postal worker could wear the blue masks that people were getting. But my postal lady on my block was wearing the mask as she was delivering the mail, and everybody said to her on the street, where'd you get the mask? And they said, oh, that lady down at 136, she's making them. And before you know it, I'd be out walking my dog, and people say, oh, you're the mask lady. Like, do you have any more? I'll take 8. And I'll take 10, and oh, my mother's in Florida. And it went like that. I mean, I was just sewing like crazy. And whether they were helpful or not, it was, I think they, now the efficacy and the CDC can study all that stuff, but for my neighbors and meeting people, it was a really good connection. And you'll kind of read about it at the end of all the different people who I sewed masks for, and in the end, one of I take piano lessons, and my piano teacher was trying to go to New York, and she started a GoFundMe, so I did a Masks for Music, and I sewed masks so she could go to Juilliard and study, and she got her dream because we raised a bunch of money sewing masks. Up until then, I didn't take any money for the masks. I said, I'm not doing anything for the world besides sewing, and I'll pay for the postage, and it's not a big deal. But people said, oh, we want to donate to something, and I say, we'll donate to whatever you want. But in the end, we decided to raise some money so that a young, talented musician could go to New York and do their dream in the middle of the pandemic. So, in a very long answer to your question, I don't know that I could not really spare people some grief, but I think one of the things you learn having grieved is when you can do something useful and make what you've learned from it have some meaning, which I would put under the category of tending grief, acknowledging that it's there, not putting it under the rug, but saying this is something we can do to help others. That was why I did it.
Thank you.
Long answer, but yeah, mask making was really it was a really important community building time for me, but it was also a reflective time. A lot of people would say, oh, whole families wiped out in LA, or, different communities losing, both grandparents and 2 cousins and big families, and that's a lot of loss for people to try to absorb, and the holes in those families is very big. So I think it takes all of us to kind of contribute in a way to healing that. Anyway, I don't know. Any of you sewers out there? Maine has a lot of sewers, yeah? Did you make some masks?
I did.
Yeah?
In fact, many of them, as I think of it, are still hanging in my mudroom.
Excellent. Keep them. They're going to be just like,
on a key hook.
yes, we have some in our Great Cranberry House, or I find them in all kinds of coat pockets that I don't know existed. And we went to the, you know, you could do the K95 ones and different ones, but some people, the handmade masks were a period piece.
Definitely.
And it definitely will be a period piece on some museum someday of all the different colorful ones that people made.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Actually, oh, sorry, along those lines, we have a amazing crafter sword, Christy Benson, and she made many masks. And she ended up going to friends and asking them for their fabrics of the masks that they made during that time, and she made this quilt.
a quilted mask.
Twins quilts.
Oh, lovely.
And it was at one point outside of Dr. Shaw's office.
Oh.
She sent it to them, and this is the director of the CDC for Maine during COVID. So he put it up there. So
Yeah,
it's
so
pretty
important.
special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a way for people to for me to connect with people, and to feel like I was doing something. And I think that's a good thing to do when you're feeling scared and nobody knew what was going to happen and how it was all going to turn out. I mean, I guess we've kind of come out the other side now, but it's going to be, people will remember it, right, as a time. And the early days in particular were very scary for people. But I felt very fortunate and lucky to have had the Japanese connection and to have spent time in Asia where the mask making was just really, the mask wearing was like not a big deal.
Yeah.
And there's no politicization of it. There's no graffiti on it. I mean, it's just a way that you show respect and concern for your neighbor, and that's all. You know, like, I have a cold, I don't want to give it to you, so I'll wear a mask.
Yeah.
And that was such a life lesson I sort of carried with me from my time there that sort of perked up in COVID, and it was really helpful to me. So anyway, that's the story. There's a lovely bit about in the book about our garden on Great Cranberry Island. So if any of you are local and next summer want to come out to the island, you can always stop by. People will know where we live, or the house down the road on the right with the big garden and the big deer fence now. But building that garden and being out on Great Cranberry has just been a wonderful thing for me and Dennis and our family. It's a great community there, and because we are, not everybody, but we are Southwest. We come into the ferry. There's a Southwest ferry or our boat into Mansit. We're so much kind of more at home in Southwest Harbor. I don't go to Northeast very much, though it's lovely too. But anyway, this feels so much more connected to Great Cranberry in a way. I hope I'm not making a political statement there. But
We get it.
well,
That's
you get it,
it.
right? I think if you're from here, you get it, right? I feel that, and we always love Flamingo Day, Parade Day. I mean, I think it's better than Christmas in our family to come in. We never miss it, never miss it.
I have the full
20 years.
regalia.
He's got flamingo gear, shorts, t-shirt, and the whole bit. He's
You could
like,
take over for Mr. Featherstone.
yeah, well.
Because I get here at 6 in the morning so that I get a good spot right in front of the bank at the turn.
Well, if you ever want to march in the parade, you are always
No,
welcome.
it's the
It's
candy.
observing.
Candy. And tripping little kids who are getting my candy.
Are there a lot of deer out there?
Oh, please, yes, there are too many deer. I mean, one morning, I think the record I counted in our front yard is 16.
Wow.
They-
That's normal for a garden, yeah.
Well,
Front yard
we
for
have
us
big
means
deer
between us and the
fence now.
water.
But, yeah, there's too many deer out on the island right now. It's an issue we want to do something about, but I don't know. I'm not in charge of that one.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming out
Oh,
tonight.
thank you so
It was really
much.
such a pleasure to have you and to have all of you
Thank you.
here, and I felt like we had a really lovely little discussion post your talk.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
it was very special to hear you read from your book, so thank you for that and for sharing many of your memories.
Yeah, thanks so much. So there are some books here if anybody wants, or there is a book I donated to the library, so if you'd like to check it out
Might
from
be
there.
checked out right now, actually. I think
I
it
think
went
there's
out.
one at the desk.
Oh, good. Yeah, we had one go out pretty quickly after I put it on display.
Oh,
So.
okay.
I think
Well,
it
there is
just
one
got
here. You
bought.
can like to check it out. There's some here to buy. They make lovely gifts. If any of you are social media, please follow me on. I have a new Instagram thing going, so I would love more followers and whatever. Any comments? I also have a little guest book, so if you just want to put your name and contact information, that's lovely. I like to keep in touch with people. Anyway, otherwise, it's been great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
yeah, any other questions or comments for Sylvia? So thanks so much for having me. This is a
Yeah.
great reading
It's really
room,
our
great
pleasure.
venue, good energy of the people. So